in the house from Dominica, Canada, the Caribbean, the United States, Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world, engaging all Dominicans at home and abroad on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station.
Good
Good
evening.
evening.
Good evening to you at home or in your vehicle. If you are on the road or at work or listening on the radio or on the internet in Dominica or abroad, thank you so much for choosing Q95. This is the Global View on Q. A very, very warm welcome to all of our Q family listeners at home and globally. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, 16th September 2025, the 35th Tuesday of 2025, and it's just about 8:02 p.m. in the studios at Q95, the big station. We're live on our radio frequencies on QTV. Please follow us on Facebook and on YouTube at Q95 FM Radio. Share the live, like our pages. Our on-air phone numbers are on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Get the latest breaking news and reviews on Q95 because you know it's true if you hear it on Q. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love and peace and prosperity and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. It is our 35th Global View on Q show for 2025, and we continue to engage with you, our local, regional, and global Q family listeners and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. My co-host, Justice Dr. Andre, is with us, and our guest is former CSA General Secretary Alvin Thomas. Tonight, we recognize historical heroes and role models in Dominica's public, private, and NGO sectors over the past years. We're doing this ahead of our 50th anniversary of independence. We're ordinary people at home and abroad who did extraordinary things for their community, for the people, or for the country, including people who assisted in Dominica from overseas in the aftermath of hurricanes and natural disasters. Those people are important as well. So you will call us and tell us about people you know who have contributed in different ways to Dominica's well-being from wherever they are, abroad or in Dominica. I think it is a must that we recognize our great people. The government honors system is now a refuge for political supporters and foreign business associates of the ruling elites. Q95 has started to honor our great people outside of the biased national award system, which has been corrupted, to say the least. Any new government will have to enact a new law for national honors that removes the system from the sole domain of government. For honors to have value, they must be based on a robust evaluation of education, of public service, or demonstrated contributions to the good of Dominica's people at home or abroad, with some public input into a scorecard of the proposed honoree. So I have some questions. How do we select our heroes and honorees? What are the criteria for such selection? What are the categories of contributions for selection? Who selects these heroes and honorees? How should our heroes be honored? Do we need a heroes park or a museum to honor them where we put up their picture and so on and their history and everything that they've done? And here are some criteria I think we can consider. Exemplary performance in a field, pioneer in a career or an occupation, impactful leadership of excellence, contribution to national development in Dominica, excellent performance and contribution in fields like business, like youth development, like teaching, manufacturing, agriculture, public service, healthcare, politics, religion, sports, NGO work, labor unions, agribusiness, construction, and other such distinguished fields. There are many other fields. We will contrast these achievements with some of that which obtains today, such as corruption and neocolonialism, dishonest political dialogue, partisan political patronage, dirty money in politics, and the misuse of CBI monies in politics. As I always say, thinking forward towards 2028 or to Dominica's 50th anniversary of independence, what are the people's expectations for their well-being? That is satisfied with their current conditions. We look forward to the suggestions of our panel or listeners, callers, and viewers on Facebook and on YouTube on our heroes and role models in the private, public, and NGO sectors over the years. Ordinary people who did extraordinary things for the community, for the people of our country, and what needs to be done to move beyond economic stagnation and oppression. So my co-host, this is Dr. Irving Andre, and former CSA General Secretary Alvin Thomas, will all share their ideas and suggestions on historical heroes and role models in Dominica's public, private sector and NGO sector over the years, ordinary people who did extraordinary things. So as usual, we invite you, our Q family and friends of Dominica, to help us give a huge shout out, a big thank you to our farmers, our healthcare providers, frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, public and private sector patriots, and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. As I always say, we welcome each and every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Q. We embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, in every community at home in Dominica, in the region and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, for keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, and the console directing the traffic. You will take your calls. As you know, the people's voice is always a priority on Q and on the Global View on Q. To call us anytime during the program, and Lambi will signal us when you call. I'm sure if you have some people from your community or from wherever you are who you think are heroes and role models that you would like to recommend to us tonight. So call us, give us your suggestion. So I go now to Justice Dr. Irving Andre for his opening comments on recognizing historical heroes and role models in Dominica's public, private, and NGO sectors over the past years, including, as I said before, people who assisted Dominica from overseas in the aftermath of hurricanes and natural disasters. And we do this ahead of our 50th anniversary of independence. So let's get the ball rolling, Dr. Andre. You're muted.
Yeah, good evening to the panelists, Alvin, yourself. Good evening to Lambi, Sherwin in the background. Good evening to your listeners, and good evening to one and all. It's a great program that you've set up this evening. This obviously would generate a fair amount of discussion. Let me indicate before I start the ball rolling, so to speak, that we've had initiatives in the past to identify those persons who made significant contributions to Dominican development. I think a few years ago, there was an initiative to select the 100 greatest Dominicans. And I think you took the initiative, Mr. G, to have an initiative to identify those Dominicans who made tremendous contributions to Dominica in whatever sphere of life, whatever sphere of endeavor. I think what we're talking about when we speak of national heroes, we're thinking of even a more exclusive list. Because quite frankly, this is not a matter of just selecting persons for the sake of selection. This is a group of persons who have made exclusive, tremendous, fundamental, foundational contributions to Dominica. And but we can't just look at the whole question of national heroes in isolation. We have to look at it from the perspective of Dominica's history. Because again, in identifying national heroes, we are seeking to identify persons who embody our hopes, our aspirations, our values, what we cherish as a nation. And if you look at Dominica's history, you can see that there has been a trajectory from Christopher Columbus's blundering upon Dominica, quite frankly, or the Kalinago people discovered Christopher Columbus as opposed to the other way around. From then, what you have as a general proposition is a struggle for Dominica or Dominicans, particularly those who were there when Columbus landed and those who came after. That is to say, as slaves, as enslaved persons and so on, brought by colonial interlopers and so on. The movement of these people from oppression, from execution to freedom. And it seems to me that if we are talking about national heroes, there is one people that we must start with, not as an individual necessarily, but the Kalinago people. The Kalinago people held up the Europeans to a point where 2 European countries had to agree that Dominica will remain neutral because of the ferocity with which they sought to preserve their own way of life, because of the ferocity with which they sought to preserve that land that they call Waitikubuli. And for 100 years, there was that recognition of Dominica as a neutral island until obviously rapacity and greed overtook whatever recognition that the European countries had formulated, and they continue fighting for Dominica well into the early 19th century. So it seems to me that in terms of the embodiment of that which is quintessentially Dominican, a desire to protect the landscape, to protect a certain way of life. In terms of heroes, it has to start with the Kalinago people. Not long ago, I stumbled on a play written by a British aristocrat. It is called The Carib Chief, a play in 5 acts. It is based on Elizabethan tragedy, Shakespeare to be precise. And it was opened on about May the 1st, 1819. And it plays to rapturous applause at the Drury Lane Theatre in England, London to be precise, and afterwards in other parts of England and actually in the United States in the 1940s. And it seems to me that that play, a Greek tragedy, Shakespearean tragedy, I should say. But again, it embodied, or it was based on the history of struggle of the Kalinago people, essentially, couched in Elizabethan tragic plays, Shakespeare, to be honest with you. But we have to start, and we have to start. We may not be able to identify one particular leader among the Kalinago people, but the Kalinago people themselves, collectively, has to be one of our foremost heroes. And it seems to me that as we project, as we walk along the path, the historical path towards self-realization, to a position, a recognition of where we are today, there are many persons who come to mind. But before I start throwing out names and so on, and let's put it this way, there will be variation as to who qualifies and who do not qualify as a national hero. But perhaps before we even go there, let me seek some guidance by some of the literature that I have seen on the whole question of who, the selection, the criteria for selection, and the attributes of those we recognize as a hero. One source indicates, for example, that the criteria should include the following. The person or persons has made a significant and lasting contribution to the country. They have enriched the lives of others. They has a legacy that will stand the test of time and has continued relevance in the future. They've contributed to the quality of life and destiny of the country. They have to be considered outstanding in their area of service, be it politics, be it economics, be it business, medicine, whatever it is. They has ready name recognition among the general population. They is recognized by his or her profession or organization, and that person embodies or is reflective of the island's cultural heritage and diversity. Now, you may ask, what type of attributes should we expect from our national heroes? Let me just throw out some. I will refer to 2 sources. But one source indicates that the following attributes we should find in a national hero or someone deserving to be recognized as a national hero. Dedication, someone who's ethical, someone who's committed to the country, someone who is self-sacrificing, not self-aggrandizing, self-sacrificing, someone who's conscientious, someone who's an agent of change or betterment, someone who's a risk taker, someone who demonstrates consistency and passion, someone who demonstrates love for the country and her people. Utansa, Mr. G, someone who demonstrates and exemplifies leadership qualities. Another source in different language probably says the same thing. A national hero should possess the following attributes: proven integrity. You have to show a sense of courage to support positive action, to point out negative actions, and dare to fight it with full knowledge of its likely risk. Patriotism. You have to promote your country's sovereignty, development, national pride, as well as unity among its inhabitants. Let me repeat this again, please. National pride, as well as unity among its inhabitants. Sacrifice. This individual's denial of personal interests, defense of public interests, and where necessary, an ability to even act to the detriments of one's own being. Vision. You have to be visionary and understand truth that is not open for all. Proven courage or bravery. You have to be famous for your acts of bravery, known to and appreciated by many people. You have to serve as an example. You have to be famous for your achievements. Famous for your self-sacrifice. You have to be known for the truthfulness of the positions that you embrace and endorse. You have to be characterized by truth and defend it without fear of suffering because of it. Magnanimity. You have to demonstrate good manners, courtesy in your behavior, relations, and interactions. Humanity. You should be characterized by love for others instead of being materialistic, Mr. G. So these are some of the general characteristics that we expect or we rely on in deciding who will qualify as a national hero. Now, as we follow the path of our historical trajectory in the 19th century, there are many persons, quite frankly, not well known in the public domain, but that is not because of their achievements, but it is because we have not paid sufficient interest on our history, quite frankly. We have not. And hopefully that will change. There are many persons in the 19th century who fought against the colonial superstructure, who fought for self-government, who fought for representation of Dominicans in the legislature. There were many incidents where persons sacrificed their lives. 1893, is it 1893 or is it 1873? The rebellion in La Plaine, for example, when a number of persons were shot dead. You know why? Because UD, no taxes, if I recall correctly, without representation. They took a stand, these folks in La Plaine. So again, as I said, we're not just looking at individuals. We're looking at communities. We're looking at entities who played a significant role in our trajectory towards self-governance. When we go along the path again, there are a number of political entities, number of political persons in the early 20th century who played a significant role in the achievement of self-government. I don't want to call all because I will obviously leave out some, but some names mine is Rawle, for example, C.A. Rawle. There are others besides Rawle, to be honest with you. We have to look at the 1932 conference, the first conference in the West Indies, a conference which was aimed as a first step, a step towards a federation. But quite frankly, the views espoused during that somewhat elitist conference, it didn't even universally embrace universal suffrage, adult suffrage. Just one representative, Marichaud from Grenada, if my memory serves me right, espoused or advocated a suffrage which was not based on wealth or money.
Irving, why don't we leave the name calling?
Mm-hmm.
Because that is what we're going to be doing throughout the next 2 hours.
I will leave it, but I have to refer to certain things which we
Okay.
have to identify.
Okay.
Then we cannot forget the whole question of what happened in 1930 in the Kalinago territory, when the colonial authorities who had met the Kalinago people in Dominica, they raided the territory because of alleged smuggling. And suffice it to say, at least 2 persons were killed by the British after they had even brought a warship into Dominica to quell what? What they perceived to be illegal activities in the Kalinago territory. As we move along, again, as I said, towards where we are today, we got universal adult suffrage in 1951, the first general elections. We know the results of that. Many persons still of great wealth by Dominican standards triumphed. There was one person of laboring population, if I recall correctly, it was from La Plaine. It was a woodcutter. He triumphed. And but that was the start of a broader representation as we move along. And we cannot forget in 1950s those who played a significant role in the genesis of party politics in Dominica. We cannot forget, and I know you're asking me to issue name calling at this point, but it would be a dereliction of my responsibility not to obviously mention people like Edward Oliver LeBlanc. His transformational values, his effort to rid Dominica of the elitist past that had enthralled so many people. Well, not enthralled, quite frankly, but that had not enslaved, but had aborted the aspirations of so many people. He played the most significant role to get rid of those social and the political conditions. So it is a shoo-in for that honor, to be quite frank with you. And then we have in the last 3 or 4 decades, we have obviously the genesis of the Dominica Freedom Party. And I'm not going through how that was formed. And then we have the exit of Edward Oliver LeBlanc in 74. We have the ascendancy of Patrick John. We all know what happened in 78, 79, 1980, when the country was embroiled in political conflict, and Eugenia Charles emerged triumphant in 1980. And in 1995, we had a change of government, and we had the UWP, and they made their contribution. And then we had the advent of Rosie Douglas in 2000. Unfortunately, we were confronted by his demise tragically in October of the same year, and we have the present administration as we speak today. So in looking at that history, we have to ask ourselves, has there been a steady, relentless progress in terms of our history? Or have we significantly regressed? Because in selecting peoples for that honor, we have to tie their passage or their contribution to the progress of Dominica, whether it's in the field of politics, in the field of business, whether it's in the field of medicine, literature, theater, whatever it is. And as I said, there are certain names that will be on everybody's list, quite frankly. But the fundamental question still remains: to what extent do they embody some of the attributes that I have named? To what extent have they exhibited self-sacrifice? To what extent have they exhibited concern and love for the people? To what extent have they made life on this small rock a better place? To what extent have they endorsed and enhanced Dominican indigenous cultural heritage? To what extent have they empowered their own people? To what extent have they improved the lives of persons? To what extent have they, for example, contributed to providing medicine for all? To what extent have they, for example, in the field of business, established enterprises that have advanced Dominica's development, that have employed Dominicans as opposed to foreign people, that have improved the lives of certain people in various parts of the island? To what extent have they done that? In the field of education, Who among us, the great headmasters in Dominica's history, who stands head over heels over all of them? Who have contributed the most in the field of law enforcement? Who embodied the spirit of justice for all and equality before the law? We have a rich tradition of Dominican jurists. Which one, or more than one, has or have attracted almost universal admiration for their contribution towards law? And obviously, the same questions could be asked in various fields. In the field of sports, we will probably have a number of contenders in that field. We may have probably more than one person identified as a national hero in the field of sports, whether cricket, whether soccer, or any. I know that my area of sport will not really rank, which is Lyman spoon race, but that's okay. Everybody, many are called, but few are chosen. I accept being relegated to the bottom of the pile. But Mr. G, this is a worthy enterprise. It is worthy because it is linked inextricably to the history of the island. And it is something that we haven't as a nation paid much attention to. And the question is, who among us not will betray our history? Who among us will stand and promote it? Who should be involved in the identification of these own persons? And let me tell you what will not happen, because the political dispensation will never do it. On a cross-section of Dominica, irrespective of status, irrespective of money in the bank, whatever it is, dedicated to that task of identifying persons who collectively embody Dominica, the essence, the quintessential Dominica. Not the Dominica that is ready to sell off its soul to the highest bidder. Not the Dominicans who, quite frankly, remove jobs from Dominicans. Not the Dominica which is fattening itself at the expense of its people. Who among us will be selected or will be honored with that task of taking that fundamental, that important responsibility? And how do we honor them? By calling their names on National Day and forgetting them the next year? By pinning something on their chest and hopefully the pin doesn't prick them or anything like that? Or by having some type of, in Jamaica, for example, as you know, you have a National Heroes Park or whatever they call it. In other countries, you have a building dedicated where you have busts, as in, for example, in our American friends, you have, for example, in the NFL, the Hall of Fame, where there's a wonderful bust of each person selected and a history and a biography. And the important thing is, Mr. G, because you have to ask yourself, why even bother? In certain countries, it is a shrine. Look at how they worship Gary Sobers in Barbados. Obviously, in Antigua, Vivian Richards and Andy Roberts and Courtney Ambrose and whoever it is. But the significance of selecting national heroes is to inspire the generation behind or the generation coming up, to give them something to look up to inspire them, to want to be like them, to be motivated to have the same type of altruism, the same degree of integrity, the same ethos of working hard if you're in business, working hard, making sacrifices to enrich yourself, as opposed to enriching yourself on the back of someone else. So this is why it is imperative for young nations such as Dominica to have that approach. And you can only have that approach if you believe in the philosophy of development that these heroes embraced and espoused. So this is not just an exercise of selecting certain persons. This is an exercise to preserve and to recognize your own history and to inspire those who are coming afterwards to work towards the betterment or to stand on the shoulders of these heroes and achieve even more. Because the environment today is much more conducive to achievement than it was before, arguably, in most fields. And so I will rest with these opening and introductory remarks and leave it to you and Alvin to take it up to the final level.
Well, you will not leave it up to us because you will be coming back to name names in different periods in our history, because there's people in communities who have done so many things that we don't know of, but they save lives in communities. Nurses, for example, they delivered babies under very trying conditions. And there's people who had the herbal teas and the local medicines in the communities that saved a lot of lives. So Alvin, Dr. Andre has laid the foundation. He has set out some criteria that we can use, to measure, right? The yardstick for measurement for the what we call the national heroes and role models. Now let's hear you. But before you to talk about the heroes, I know that you're chairing a committee that is administering a big thing for the St. Mary's Academy. Maybe you might want to take a moment and tell us a little bit about that before you get going.
Thank you, Mr. G. Thank you. Let me say good evening to you and to my co-panelist, Dr. Andre, and of course, Lambe in the studio and Irvin on the console. Again, it's always a pleasure to be part of that conversation. I always refer to it as a conversation that we're having. And like you say, to our many folks who are tuned in to the program, it's a conversation. And the intention of the conversation is how do we advance as a people? And you ask about the St. Mary's Academy, and it's all fit into what we're discussing.
Irvin, could you mute your mic? Thank you.
And it all fits into the conversation we're now having. Yes, I'm part of a committee that is planning an SMA alumni reunion this next month from October 11th through the 19th. And I know you, although you may not be an alumnus of SMA, but you taught at SMA. And so was Dr. Irvin Andre. You both taught at SMA, although not benefiting from the foundational educational aspect of it. And St. Mary's Academy has been in existence as an institution for a very long time. For this year marks 93 years since the Christian Brothers came into Dominica and established a school. And as we talk about hero, the first headmaster of the St. Mary's Academy was S.J. Lewis, that is Ozzy's Lewis' father. He was the first headmaster when the school started off with just a few. I believe, if I recall from what memory, it was just about 14 young men who at the time it was felt that they did not have or were not able to gain access to the Dominica Grammar School, which incident predates the St. Mary's Academy, and was felt that there was a need for a high school for young men, and that brought about the St. Mary's Academy. We have not had a class reunion in those 93 years, or alumni. I'll put it either a class or alumni reunion in those 93 years. And we, the what you might want to call the products of the 70s, incidentally, during my time, and those of us who took upon that initiative to put together that reunion, are products of the 70s. And you know what happened in 72, 73 at the St. Mary's Academy. That situation changed the whole landscape of education in Dominica as we know it today, and even at the school itself. So we took on that initiative to say, well, hey, maybe it's time that we have an alumni reunion. And so far, the number of SMA alumni are very excited about it, as well as our teachers, person who taught us during that time. And let me make the point. Let me make that point. It is a reunion open to all alumni. So if you're an alumni of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, it is opened up. And the theme itself suggests that. The theme is the past, looking back on what happened then, the present, what obtains now, and the future. Where do we see the school and education in general going in Dominica? So that would entail, of course, a number of activities, of course, starting off with the church service on the 12th, that 12th of October. And as you recall, Mr. G, our motto of the school is Ora et Labora. You remember that? Ora et Labora, which means pray and work. So certainly we'll start off with that. Thanksgiving Mass, followed on the Monday with a night of reflection, where we will be, reflecting again on the past, what led us, or how did we as young persons got involved, and what made us who we are today. Night of reflection with the sort of cocktail reception followed then. And then Tuesday, the usual island tours that goes to that. Wednesday is also another significant day. We'll be having a forum, an educational forum at the UWI Global School of Learning, I think it's called, or Global Center. We'll be having an educational forum. And the intention there is to look at where education is today. And with all this discussion that's going on educational reform, is our curriculum meeting what the world of work's required? Are we really training or educating our students for what is to obtain? So we'll be having that educational forum with a number of past SMA guys, to persons like St. Bernard Sebastian, Edmond Tavernier, Rose Keynes, La Roque, who taught us as well during that time, Swinburne Augustine, all of those persons, Dr. Francis Sevre, all of these alumnus and of the SMA. And the same Wednesday will be, at the school with a special assembly. We intend to make some donations available to sporting donations, sporting gears to the students of the various, the soccer team, the football team. That's going to take place on that Wednesday. Thursday, we have what we call a reggae Kada Sleeps on the Block with Labadee down at the pier, the Paradise Pier, Labadee himself, an SMA old boy. And then Friday is where we got a big old boys, SMA old boys concert. And like Mr. G, 90%, I would put it, of the bands and the entertainers that previously in Dominica are products of SMA, starting with our 10-time Calypso King Dice. So we have King Dice, we have Gordon Henderson, all of these are SMA, Fitzroy, the late Fitzroy Williams, Kelly the Ghost, Shelley, First Serenade, you have the Team Durant. These are guys, the list, Daryl Bob, Cornell Phillip. I don't want to start to call names like Vince, and I leave a name out, But we're having what is called an SMA Old Boys concert. And there we're going to bring Daddy Chess, the likes of the likes, all of these products of SMA who have painted the landscape, the Gramax, the Exile ones, all that. That's SMA. So we're hoping to have that huge concert on that Friday. With your permission, Mr. G, I'll just plug in and say it's a very, get your ticket now. It's only $50, adult, 25 for kids for that concert. And it's at the Sendra's Hall. The space is not as wide as the stadium. So you want to get your ticket early and be part of that. Can you imagine having a performance with a Daddy Chess, a Daryl Bob, a King Dice, Shelley, and all those guys, all at once performing? You can imagine what that's going to be. So that's on the Friday. And I will say after the church service on the Sunday morning, we have a brunch. And that too. And fundamentally, though, I will say all of the proceeds that is generated from any and all of those activities goes towards the school in terms of a project that I'm also part of, which is the re-roofing of the Brother Egbert German wing. The roof got damaged during Hurricane Maria many moons away, and it requires some replacement, to the extent that one classroom has been abandoned. The WA4 classroom has been abandoned as a result of that. So all the proceeds is going to go towards that project, which is another project that we're undertaking. So that's in a nutshell, quickly, what the SMA reunion, the 11th through the 19th. But jumping more specifically now to the topic and the at hand, I think Irvin did justice in covering quite a bit in his introductory remarks. And I think as we look at that and we have that conversation, I think what comes to mind really is basically three questions. What constitutes a national hero? And I think Irvin sort of addresses some of that in terms of the patriotism, the demonstration of love and loyalty for the nation, service and sacrifice, leadership and inspiration, moral integrity, nation building contribution, enduring legacy. And the next question is how a country should recognize national heroes, and whether we have an official national hero status, we have monuments or memorials, National Hero Day, cultural celebrations, name institutions or landscapes, current season stamps, scholarships and award. I mean, when you talk about naming institutions, I mean, 3 years from now, we'll be celebrating 50 years as a young independent nation. And don't you think it's time that we look at our institutions? We currently have what is called a Dominica China Friendship Hospital. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. And most of the hospitals in my area name after some doctor who contributed significantly to medicine, or some, philanthropist who provided. So you may be familiar with Emory Hospital, named after Dr. Emory. Huge establishment. Are we saying that we do not have someone in Dominica who contributed in the area of medicine and health, so that our hospital would be more appropriately named the Dr. Don McIntyre Hospital, or Carissa Etienne Hospital, or Dr. Green Hospital, or Dr. whatever hospital, that in 2025, 3 years shy of 50-year anniversary, the hospital is called the Dominica China Friendship Hospital. So how a country should recognize national hero. And I think even more fundamentally is, which Irvin mentioned as well, is how young person should be made aware of these national heroes. Because what you find is that if you were to carry a survey now and ask, you can go to the high school, not the primary school, the high schools, and randomly ask, and even the college, have you ever heard of Edward Oliver Leblanc or Frank Barron? They might be like a deer in the headlight, because they'll tell you, well, who are you talking about? I don't know. I mean, and that is a travesty, because Irvin rightly pointed out that if you do not know your history as a young person coming up, then it's difficult for you to be a part of development or change, because you're not quite sure where you come from or what obtained before. And that's one of the advantages that we had in our coming up, because we read, we knew all of the things. So it is very important how young people should be made aware of the national heroes, and that can be you know, we could discuss that in a little more detail as we go into the conversation. What kind of school programs, what kind of projects, what kind of heritage education or youth engagement days that we would have. Today we're into a digital media and apps. I mean, how can we use that? How can we leverage that so that young people will know more about the Frank Baron and the Ralph Kazemi? I mean, there's a brilliant book written by the granddaughter of Ralph Kazemi, his grandfather, Black Man Listen. I mean, that is a literature book that should be on in every high school in Dominica. It tells you and it walks you through the life of J.R. Ralph Kazemi. And the title of the book is Black Man Listen. That should be on our shelves in schools. There is, as Irvin talked about the Kalinago, I subscribe to that. The Kalinago people. And the fact that as we speak now, in 300 plus years, we've had the first Kalinago chief in the person of Annette Sanford, Chief Annette Sanford. That is historic. How many high school persons know about that? That is historic. It took 300 plus years for a Kalinago woman to be the chief. There's another book which again is worth referencing. It's a book published by Helen Pauline Francis Seaman, the late, she passed. And it's called The Unconquerable Spirit, the Indigenous Resistance to Colonization in the Caribbean, Windward Islands, and several references made in there about the Kalinago people. That's a book that should be in our libraries at all schools across Dominica. And not to forget a publication by Dr. Thompson Fountains, The Maroons of Dominica, 1764 to 1818, Resistance, Rebellion, and Freedom from Slavery. That is part of our history as a people. And I need not mention several of the publications that Dr. Andre himself and my good friend Gabriel Christian has published. All of these should be part of our school library. And given the fact that as we speak now, we do not have in place a functional public library where young persons can go in and read and discuss and research and do all that stuff. Now, I will say though that we do have, and Irvin sort of alluded to that, we do have in Dominica what is called the Meritorious Service Honor Act, Chapter 1909, that outlines how some of those awards, the various awards that we confer on individuals and organizations, and as the listeners may be aware, some of them, one of our highest national awards is the Dominica Award of Honor. We have this as one of our highest awards, followed by the Cicero Award, the Meritorious Service Award, and then you have Service Medal Award and Long Service Medal Awards. Now, the questions remain, are these now just given at a dime a piece? Is that what it is? I mean, there are certain criteria that the key aspect is the purpose, why this wasn't getting that. But, I mean, if you go back in recent times and you sort of, I mean, you know, the nomination comes from individual, can come from citizens and organizations, goes to the cabinet secretary, who in turn presents it, I guess, presents it to the cabinet, who makes a final decision. But some of what we are seeing and hearing, does it really meet, for example, the Dominica Award of Honor, which is in brief is referred to as the DAH. It is conferred on persons who have made extraordinary contribution to the development of the country in various fields, public service, education, culture, diplomacy, etc. And it's not necessarily awarded every year. So that tells you the significance. And it reflects the highest, you hear the word? The highest level of national gratitude and recognition. It serves as an example of what Dominica values, and it encourages excellence and service. It is both symbolic, honoring legacy, and practical, giving public recognition. So it's one of the highest awards. And you and I know some I want to be very, very respectful and don't question persons who got the award. But that just tells you who should receive this award. And let me just end in my introductory by referencing our constitution. Because as a country, we are guided by a constitution. It's so ironical that we got independence from Britain, and Britain does not have a written constitution, but they conform with a number of norms and whatever you might want to call it, traditions and conventions, but we have a written constitution. And that constitution, again, I'm hoping that every high school and every even primary school should have a copy or copies of the constitution. My good friend Alec Lawrence wrote a book a couple of years ago about the understanding the concept. Very good book, I must say. Compliment him on that. That too should form part of our library, of our collections at the schools. But the preamble of our constitution starts off by, whereas the people of Dominica, and that embodies what we are discussing right now, the conversation we're having, have affirmed that the Commonwealth of Dominica is founded upon principles that acknowledges the supremacy of God, faith in fundamental human rights and freedom, the position of the family in the society of free men and free institutions, the dignity of the human person, and the equal and inalienable rights with which all members of human family are endowed by the Creator. That's the very first open line at A. But very importantly at B, respect for principles of social justice, and therefore believes that the operation of economic system should result in so distributing the material resources of the community as to subserve the common good. And there should be adequate means of livelihood for all, and labor should not be exploited or forced by economic necessity to operate in inhumane conditions, but that there should be opportunity for advancement on the basis of recognition of merit, ability, and integrity. And those were some of the areas that Dr. Andre mentioned when he spoke about what constitutes a national hero: patriotism, service and sacrifice, leadership and inspiration, moral integrity, nation building. How do you contribute to the development of your nation? Enduring legacy. What do we leave behind for those that are coming after us? So I think it is a conversation that needs to be had. I mean, next month, October, will mark the how many years since Prime Minister Ruzi passed, and I believe October is supposed to be his birth date as well, if I'm not mistaken. And how many young person knows about that? I mean, when you take Ruzi's life from where he started off as a young man and what he went through and where he ended up as prime minister and then succumbed in office, how have we celebrated that? Have we talked about having a bust somewhere, a bust of these heroes? I mean, we don't have what you call it, a museum or anything like that. We had this building in Roseau, the Gene Reeves building. That should have been a preserved historical site in the heart of Roseau. I mean, you and I, Mr. G, I've been to New Orleans, Louisiana, and Roseau should be like a walking city where you have a building like Gene Reeves building and serve as a museum where tourists coming off the ship can go in there and see our heroes and read more about our Kalinago people and our Maroons and our Frank Barron and our doctors and our scholars and our agriculturists and our cultural icon. I mean, take Midnight Groovers. The leader of Midnight Groovers is what, 80 or so thereabout, and this guy's been doing music in Dominica for the last 50 or more years. There was a mango tree in the yard where that new building was constructed. That mango tree was 150 plus years old and was still bearing mango. And I know that because I lived right across as a little boy growing up on Fields Lane. That was my backyard. And that mango tree was destroyed, was cut down. That's part of our culture. That's part of our history. That's what makes us who we are as a people. So, but the important thing, which I will say, is that how now, with that conversation we're having, how do we engage the young people and how young people should be made aware of the national hero so that the legacy continues. And as we move into the 50th year of our independence as a nation, as we get into the next 50, we can then, say to ourselves and live within the spirit of our Constitution and the preamble, which I just referenced, the two areas of the Constitution.
Yep, thanks a lot for these introductory remarks, Alvin. As we go along, Lambi, you will invite the calls from our callers, and I'm sure that as we start naming names, which we're going to do now to position people at different eras in Dominica's history as we go along, you will want to give the callers the numbers now before I go back to Dr. Andre, so that they can call in and maybe suggest some names of people in their communities who have contributed significantly to the lives of these communities. You can give the numbers out.
The Global View and Q, the numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. Those are local numbers. The international number or the overseas number, 305-432-9624. Let me run those numbers one more time. 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, and 305-432-9624. Back to you, Mr. G.
Okay, so Dr. Andre, I mean, we've heard a lot of comments, but from both of yourself and from Alvin, in terms of all this.
I think a call is coming through. A call is coming.
You have a call? Let's take it, Lambi.
Yes, caller, please go ahead with your.
I'm hearing somebody maybe calling for a long time, but I just figure out if it's that person I know, because he speak about filtering, and I want to wonder if it's that ways of it and function in the filtering that Alvin and Thomas.
Alvin, answer your name.
Sorry, what was the question she asked?
I didn't
Yes.
know it.
She asked if it's you who fell from a tomato tree.
Well, yeah, I raised in Phil's Lane. I'm Alvin Thomas. I'm related to Ted Daly. Ted Daly is my uncle.
Okay,
Ted,
the Mabas has there around there.
Yeah, around my bus area opposite.
You went to St. Mary's Academy.
St. Mary's Academy, yes. I went to St. Mary's Academy, yes. Yes.
Okay, I recognize who's the person. What you are organizing for St. Mary's Academy. I realize who Alvin is now. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, my dear. Thanks for calling.
Thank you so much for calling. All right, so Irving, the fact of the matter is, we have all these meritorious service awards and all these top awards in the country. You spoke about criteria. Do you believe that there should be enacted a new law for national honors that removes a system from the sole domain of government? Because for honors to have value, they must be based on a robust evaluation of education, public service, demonstrated contributions to the good of Dominica's people at home and abroad, with some public input into the scorecard of the proposed honorees. So as you address your thoughts to some of the names you're going to pull out now, as you go historically, of people who are supposed to be role models and supposed to be getting these awards and be kept placed on a pedestal. Lambi, let's take a call.
Yes, caller, please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes,
Good evening. I would recommend Nurse Diary who lives at Pottersville from Maricot. One award.
Excellent.
That delivers how much the doctors did very good. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So Nurse Dalrymple is a name that's come up. This name has been very prominent on the radio. I mean, and everybody knows Nurse Dalrymple, loves Nurse Dalrymple. So I think this is a good suggestion. Lambi, you don't have a call now, right? Okay. So Irving, Dr. Andre, let's call some names now of persons who you consider. You want to go back all the way to Frank Barron and then come up the road as we go along?
Well, there's a number of persons who will be considered and should be considered. And no doubt the body appointed to make those kinds of selections will give them consideration. Again, we're looking at various spheres of activity. In terms of the trade union movement, it's difficult to ignore Emmanuel Loblack, quite frankly. It is difficult in terms of industrial or manufacturing. A.C. Shillingford, quite based on his achievements, which in my view are tremendous. It is difficult to ignore even people like Philip Nassif, who built on the legacy of his father, quite frankly, based on what they were involved in. In terms of sports, it is nigh impossible to ignore people like Irving Shillingford, obviously. And even before that, there was a long line of Shillingfords. I mean, you can have one award for all the Shillingfords who literally represented Dominica, Windward Islands, and the West Indies.
Irving, 1 second. Want to take a call, Lambi?
Caller, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lambi. Good evening to you. Good evening to your listeners. Very interesting, this topic this evening. It's always good to give people their flowers before they go to their grave. That has always been my motto. And on that note, I want to recommend Dr. Paul, who have made a meaningful contribution to the development of Dominica. And there are so many, we can name so many, but I just give somebody else a chance, and I'll just give Dr. Paul have made a meaningful contribution to the development of Dominica, so I recommend him. Thank you.
Yes, that's an excellent recommendation. Yes, Dr. Andre, let's go.
Yeah, it is obviously difficult to ignore some of those pioneering doctors who held the medical service and make it what it is, not today, but what it was about 20, 25 years ago. Dr. McIntyre, there's a string of McIntyres who are in the medical field, but certainly we know which Dr. McIntyre we're talking about. The first indigenous surgeon in the islands. We have the seminal work of Dr. Wati, Dr. Griffin, and Dr. Green, even
looks like we're having a little technical difficulty with Irving's.
Yeah, another call is coming. Another call. Maybe we'll take that while he comes.
Okay, let's take a call, Lambi, while we wait for Irving.
Thanks for calling. Caller, go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, good evening. There are so many names I can mention, although some of them are passed. But looking at even the hospital, I find probably instead of this China Friendship Hospital, you had Dion McIntyre, Mr. McIntyre, one of our great surgeons. You had Dr. Paul. You had Francisco Dorival, one of our great midwives, one of the best. You had Dr. Carissa Etienne, Dr. Watty, Dr. Paul. You know, even Irving Shillingford, we have Ophelia. Look at Sebastian. We have a lot of people, you know. We can recommend for something, you know. But that hospital I just signed, say for example, Dion McIntyre, Francisco Dorival, these names should be considered. Dr. Paul. And we have a lot, we have many more, but I'm just mentioning those. And I want to give a little story. When remember, Irving, every time I'm calling Irving Shillingford name, they had put a name, you know, Irving Shillingford. May his soul rest in peace. I had a stand in the Windsor Park, Mr. G. And Irving went to the park a few years ago. He told me to some sport thing they had there. And they asked him to pay, you know. I don't know if you know him, Irving Shillingford told him, but my name is on a stand there, and you're asking me to pay. And he just left. He left the Windsor Park. So probably they didn't even know him. And I just thought we should have a museum somewhere where he could put all our, you know, people who excel, musicians. You have swinging stars for many years. You have the band in Granby. So many bands. We have a lot of we need a museum where we can put those names. So the young people now can know who was that person, who is that person, who was that person. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot for that major contribution there. I believe that Wadix is trying to do something. But Lambi, let's take another call.
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, Lambi.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. G, and the entire panel.
Yes, good evening.
Yeah, Mr. G, I always listen to this program. Well, Q95 is I'm not the owner, but that's my station. But I hook up a little bit late. The recommendation we can make, is it from any aspect of life?
Any aspect of life.
Yeah, well, I am taking the initiative tonight to recommend Mr. Lennox Linton for an award. Mr. G, I plead and beg for us to recognize him and appreciate him. And so I think tonight I am in line with the program. So
Okay.
I am putting Mr. Lennox Linton on the table. But as you know, you all are the boss. You all have to see whether it's okay or not. But Mr. G, let me ask you a quick question, please. I am begging you. You don't have to stay on that at all. But for months, I'm listening to the program to see whether there will be an open door to ask this question, but there's never an open door. So I'm just going to ask the question. It's not going to divert your program. Mr. G, during the COVID-19 vaccine, we had 2 Dominican doctors on the program. You brought them, a male and a female. But the female one time said that she had future concerns, which is Dr. Gail Defoe. I remember her name. He said, will that one at some point bring her back on the program for us to ask her what we have seen today, whether there was a future concern? I'm just asking, so you don't have to stand up.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, that's always a possibility. That's always possible. All right, so thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that call and for your suggestion. Dr. Andre, you want to?
Yes, and again, we have to look at various spheres, not just the popular ones, politics and music and so on. We have a rich history of musical expression. We also have a rich history of indigenous Dominican music, and they cannot be placed in a category of being the illegitimate child of Dominica's development. We have people, take for example the credit union movement. I think there was a nun called, is it Sister Alicia? I think her name was, whatever. I may be wrong.
Sister Alicia,
who was the mother of the credit union movement in Dominica. These are unsung heroes. What about J.B. Charles, who started the penny bank? It went under in the 1970s when there was a revision of the amount of money banks or financial institutions should have in reserve. And that spelled the doom of the penny bank in Dominica. What about those persons who worked on the ground? You see, because typically when we talk about national heroes, we think of transformative individuals. We think about, we link it to status, and we have to deviate from that. What about fisher folk, for example? Persons who exemplify, I should say, contributions to their own sphere of existence, to their own communities, who reign in, reign out, endure the toils and hardships with little fanfare to provide not just for their own families, but for their community. What about those unheralded heroes? What about farmers? There are significant farmers, I could rattle off a number of names, in various communities who built from scratch. Note the word, please, built from scratch. To what extent do we still value those values? To what extent do we recognize these folk? To what extent do we recognize agriculture? We've become so gentrified that we have to wear gloves to pull out probably a little plant of dashin from the ground, Gasson. You know? So this whole exercise is not just putting certain individuals on a pedestal. It is literally to excavate your own history, to rediscover what should mean something, what should inspire us, as opposed to the persons who wear the most expensive suits, as opposed to whoever tore down that Jean Rees building that Alvin was talking about another national hero. Jean Rees, she literally put Dominica on the map in terms of the literary world. But not only that, what about Phyllis Sharolfery? Her contributions to literature and also her contributions to the political entity, to politics, formation of the Dominican Labour Party in 1955. These are folk, quite frankly, we should have no hesitation to embrace, irrespective of the race, class, creed, social standing, or lack thereof. Because in that selection, we are basically basing it on the embracing of every Dominican, irrespective of whatever walk of life, whatever they achieve, whatever sphere that they've achieved. Selfless sacrifice, integrity, toil, providing for their own folk. What about those Dominicans abroad? There are many of them who've contributed tremendously. Telford Georges, the brilliant jurist. Cozy Harris also, who was also involved in the West Indies Federation. He had an executive position. I can't remember. I think it may be Solicitor General or Assistant, but I can't remember. There are many others. What about the legal field, as opposed to judges? There are persons who've, quite frankly, succeeded, who fought the good fight. What about Sir Brian Arlene? Not just as a jurist, but as a lawyer in the 1950s, 70s, who certainly took on many causes which they were then unpopular with the political directorate. Represented many dreads who were persecuted left, right, and center. When certain union leaders were confined to house arrest, he was one who took on the case. These were not money-making cases. In fact, those lawyers who dared to take on those causes paid a price. Is the legal fraternity influenced or inspired by the work of these folk? I know some are, but I don't pretend to know all of them, but I certainly know that some are. And some are engaged, whether in pro bono work, but in work, quite frankly, which needs to be taken on. So that we have to look at that from a broad perspective, not just not selection of the usual suspects, influenced by last name, but on the contributions these folk are making, even if today their spheres of existence or their spheres of activity have been relegated to the back of the class. Because in recognizing these people, for example, take for example farming, we are recognizing the contribution of farming to Dominica's history. And I just use farming as an example. As I said again, the world has changed. The diaspora has contributed tremendously to Dominica's development. There are many folk in the diaspora who deserve to be considered. That's all I can say. But this is an ongoing process.
Yes, Irving, can I disturb you a bit? Lambi, you want to take a call?
Yes. Good evening, caller. Go ahead, please.
Hello, good evening again. I want to ask one question. Mr. G and the rest of the panel, don't you think the whole selection of this thing should be revamped instead of people nominating? Because sometimes you forget people. I find they should have an independent committee, you know? You get a write-up on people and then you make a decision. I'm just asking, don't you think that whole system should be revamped?
Well, I think so. I certainly believe so. And in fact, I recommended that. Irving, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you indicated that, and the caller is absolutely correct, that for an important initiative such as this, you would be trivializing it to leave the question of selection to a narrow group of persons beholden to the government. In fact, if that's what you want to do, then it would be a complete colossal waste of time, because we know exactly what would happen. Cronies and rewarding folk for their loyalty, these will become the main criteria in that process. You would be trivializing it or bastardizing it if that is the intent. But is there the will to have an independent committee? That is the question. In my view, there is not.
Yeah. No, I agree with Irvin. I think while I reference the Act, Chapter 1909, which pretty much outlines it's the Meritorious Service Honor. I think it may require some review in terms of how the selections are made, and having a panel of persons that take into account the overall, the full complexity of when and how an award is to be bestowed on someone, and don't have any sort of political persuasions and stuff like that. I mean, I would say, for example, I referenced the Dominica Highest Award, the Dominica Award of Honor, the DAH, and some names that come to mind. For example, Thea Lafont got it last year, 2024. I think well deserved. You have Dr. Lennox Honeychurch. He's also a recipient of that award. The Dame Eugenia Charles, Dr. Nicholas Liverpool, Dr. Edward Oliver Liebler, former premier, Mr. Philip Nassif, deceased, Cecil Burton, Irving Shillingford, Dr. Carissa Etienne. All of those names, a person who got the DAH. Well deserved, I must say, well deserved. And even in reference to the books that I referenced earlier, Dr. Honeychurch himself, I've written extensively, historian. And his recent book he had was just published, was one titled Resistance, Refuge, Revival, the Indigenous Kalinago. And he had one prior to that called In the Forest of Freedom. I'm referring to this because that should form part of our history. That should be on in every school. But in terms of names,
Alvin, let me just let's take the call.
Take the call.
Please go ahead, caller.
Yes, good evening. I'm listening to you gentlemen. They're making a lot of sense. One of my problems is that they named the hospital the Dominica Chinese Friendship Hospital. What about naming it Dr. Waters Hospital? What about naming it after the late Reverend Philip Potter was the first man to become the Secretary General of World Council of Churches? And there's a lot of us who have done a lot for our homeland, especially during Hurricane David. I was able to get our church in the Bronx on White Plains Road, Tranquility Methodist Church, and that place was the use of headquarters after we sought all this stuff to send down to Dominica. There's a lot of us who do things, but we didn't do it for anything. When they were going to pass this seditious act, I was a member of the Dominica Defense Force in those days. When I went to police headquarters, they were giving us SLR rifles. I dropped that gun down, and I decided to walk across the fire brigade. I was also a fire officer. That was for country. Okay? There was a lot of us who have done a lot for our homeland, but we did not do it for anything, for any kind of title. And the gentleman from Fields Lane, I'm a man from Fields Lane also, and I'm wondering whether you're referring to the mango tree at the Pearson.
That's yeah. Well, yes, I'm referring to the mango tree that was in the yard of the Gene Reeves Old Sparrow building. That there was this mango tree, they're 150 years old. Also in Mount Pearson, there was also a mango tree. There were quite a few mango trees at Roseau, you know, in quite a few of the yards. Yes, mango long, and all that good stuff. So up here in the States, Mr. G, and I'm sure Irvin, you know, I can't just on my own cut a tree right in front of my yard of my house. I can't. I mean, and I'm talking about a pea bois that's not producing anything for me, you know, no mangoes, no nothing. If I'm to cut this tree, I have to seek permission and apply. And the guy, the whatever department will come in, and they will do the investigation. And if they find that that tree should not be cut for whatever reason, I can't cut it. I'm telling you, that's how it is. But we were able just willy-nilly to cut down a tree that is 150 years old in Roseau. Can you imagine a tourist coming off the ship and you bring the tourist to that mango tree and you say to that tourist, you see this tree right there? It's 150 years old. And here, look, you can stretch your hands and pick a mango and eat it. Could you imagine what kind of promotion that would be for your country, for Roseau? Huh? So I agree with some of the callers that call, and I'm pretty much I'm proposing, therefore, for the consideration of the government, that as we head into our 50th year of independence, that we should change the name of that hospital. We have only one hospital in Dominica. I'm proposing we change the name of that hospital. I mean, I want to propose any name yet, but high up on the list would be the late Dr. Carissa Etienne. We recall Dr. Etienne's role in healthcare, primary healthcare in Dominica. And Dominica was a model. The rest of the Caribbean was coming to Dominica to understand how the healthcare system was put together. That was a model. And we know what her role was prior to her death, what she served at PAHO. And I think it is just opportune.
Let's take a call.
Sure, go ahead.
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead. Caller, are you paying attention?
Okay. So Alvin, these calls have been coming frequently for the change of name of the hospital. But let's call. Try again.
Yes, caller, please go ahead.
That
Caller,
might be the overseas line, which may not be working.
No, it's not the overseas line, but the person is there, but the person not responding.
Okay. Well,
let me just conclude very quickly. I think that we should not go into our 50th year of independence by not changing the name of that hospital. We have enough medical persons. Names came out here tonight: Dr. Dion McIntyre, Dr. Green, Dr. Paul, you name it. I think that hospital should be appropriately renamed, and renamed after one of our own for their contribution towards medicine, towards health in Dominica. And that is my proposal. As a Dominican, as a citizen of Dominica, I'm proposing that for the consideration. But let me just say very quickly, though, too, in terms of there is legislation now that governs how this thing should be done. But like everything else, as you know, Sheridan, sometimes folks do not conform with the legislation. And we see it in a number of areas. How contracts are given, no bid contract. I mean, we spoke about that the last time we were on this program. There's a procurement act that tells you exact outlines how contract should be issued, government contract. There is a planning act that outlines how planning should be undertaken, what should be taken, where development should be taking place. 2 weeks ago, there was this big conversation on the radio talking about a fowl coop and a pig pen and a hotel trying to cohabit next to each other. Now, clearly, if the planning act was enforced as it should have been, we would not be having that conversation of having a chicken coop and a pig pen right next to a hotel. There would have been proper planning that designate what goes where and what. So it's not just it's a question too of whether in fact what we have now is being addressed, because prior to that, as you know, Mr. G, we've been giving these awards for a while now. And what you see now, as I said, I don't want to be accused of calling any names or sticking to suggest persons who receive the awards or the designated award. And let me tell you something also. These awards can be withdrawn, you know, by the under the act. It stipulates that if the individuals receive the award, I don't have the exact reading before me, but to the extent that if they allow themselves to be in a situation that is not in keeping with having received the award can be recalled. That's the extent to which the actual act outlines the various areas in how one receives the award and how you maintain the award throughout your lifetime. Okay, so
Alvin, you know, one of the things that the reason I'm opening the lines is because what I'm encouraging is for callers to call and talk about ordinary people in their communities who have done extraordinary things to change the lives of people in those communities. So I'll be welcoming those calls. You see people like Nurse Dalrymple, that is a typical good name, because this lady has done tremendous work in her community. And Lamb, if you have a call.
Yes, we have a couple calls coming in. Caller, please go ahead. No, that we lost that one. Hold on. Go ahead, please, caller.
Do you have any problem with this call?
That line has a problem.
All right. So let me just go ahead for 1 minute and say something. Alvin, what I want to do, I want to drop some names. Alvin and Dr. Andre. I want to drop some names because, let's start with Ralph Kazimi. And people like Rice Gregoire, people like Ozzie Lewis, people like Lockhart Sebastian, Irving Shillingford, Norbert Phillip, Clarence Signoret, Vernon Shaw, Dr. D.O.N. McIntyre, Dr. Edward Watty, Dr. Hendricks Paul, Louis Benoit, Whitney Louis, Frank Barron, Edward Oliver Libler, and Mrs. Libler. We sometimes forget the wives who stood by them for years. Donnie Boyd, Dr. Benjamin and Mrs. Benjamin, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, Mr. Edison James, Julius Timothy, Norris Prevost, Philip Nassif, Fuerisa, Wadi Astafan. He played cricket for the country. Van Til Fagan, and before that, Cecil Bellot, who started Bello, Louis Gabriel, Police Commissioner Owen Phillip, Police Commissioner Ainsley Pearl, Judith Pestida, Jean Finnegan, Dr. Clayton Shillingford, Major Earl Johnson, Dr. Dave Shillingford, Doreen Francis. You know how much so many scholarships this lady right on the Save the Children. Mrs. Pascal at Granby called Sis, Vernice Belloni, Mrs. Liblan, I said Liblan's wife already, James Edwards, coordinated disaster relief efforts, now living in Bridgeport, Connecticut, I believe. This is Gabriel Prince, and so you had quite a lot of those people, like Helen Simon, Low Black, you had Phyllis Chandolfrey, Garnet Didier, Taylor from Dr. Philip Potter. These are just names that come to mind. Your thoughts on some of those names, and plus the dearth of other names that's out there. But before you come on, let's take a call.
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead with your call.
My suggestion now is Alec Reid, as one of the great sportsmen of Dominica.
Alec Reid, that's right. That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. You're quite right. Dr. Andre, you would know something about that.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, brilliant fellow. Unfortunately, he was, well, in my view, criminally excluded from the West Indies, even to a greater extent than Irving was in the following decade. In '56, this guy was the best. Even a visiting Australian captain said he's seen no one like Alec Reid. But they concocted some reason to the cricket deities in the West Indies, in their usual fashion, based on elitist notions and so on. They excluded him blatantly and criminally, in my view. What about Val Reid? Val Reid, another brilliant cricketer, also excluded, probably one of the best all-rounders. One person actually said that he was, in their view, in that person's view, he was better than Walcott. But what about Bishop Bowers? Not many people know about Bishop Bowers. Not enough people know about Bishop Bowers, the first black bishop in the Western Hemisphere. What about him? What about Cardinal Felix? I'm happy to say that I wrote a little book about him and so on. Brilliant fellow. He became a priest in 1956 also. And he never talked too much about it. But the whole intersection of race and being a priest, he had to contend with that in the 50s. But it's an example or an illustration of his nobility and humility that he never publicly spoke of the kind of disparaging remarks that he had to contend with. I happen to know because I've had occasion to speak with a family member or two. But these are folk who should be recognized. Bishop Potter, somebody mentioned a while ago. We have some folk who have made significant contribution. There are Dominicans in New York going back to the 20s. There was a friendship, I think it was the Dominica Friendship Organization, or whatever the name is, made tremendous contributions going back to the 1920s, giving scholarships to Dominicans. This organization, Dada, followed in their footsteps, also made significant contributions. There's one in England, the name escapes me now. These folk have to be recognized, or they have to be spoken about, because if we don't, who will? Therein lies the problem. But we have to ask ourselves as a society, as an independent nation, do we have any interest in those things, Gaston? Do we really have interest in recognizing those folk who've contributed in so many disparate fields and endeavors and spheres of life? Do we place any significance on that? Or do we cut down the mango tree? Or do we make sure that the library dive or endures death by 1,000 cuts? Or the State House on the Moor? Or the Barracoon building in Roseau next to the market? What value do we place on these things, preserving the artifacts of Dominica's history? You tell me. Compared and contrast what our approach to what we see in the other islands, whether it's Barbados, whether it's Antigua. Go to the Antiguan airport, you see a picture who? Vivian Richards. Barbados, again, the Garfield, the great Garfield, and so on. Look, Barbados just recognized, what's her name again? Rihanna, as a national hero. What about Chubby and his brother, for God's sakes? Or even the band? And we have Exile One. What about the Gaylords? Pray for the Black Men. Hit Me With Music, picked up by Bob Marley and popularized. What value do we place on our history, whether it's music, whether it's health, whether it's politics, or whether it's business, artistry? What about Alwyn Bully in the theater? What about we talked about Ralph Kazemi and others. Yeah. What value do we place on these things? No, we place none if we think that history starts with us and finishes with us. We have to break that cycle of amnesia.
Yeah. No, I agree. And for example, let me give some practical example, Mr. G. We have the Arak House of Culture. And we've had several persons raising the alarm that this need to be fixed. And you hear a number of reasons why it has not been able to be fixed after 8 years since Hurricane Maria, or more, going on 9 years. And I mean, why is not there a priority to repair the building and adorn the walls of that building? So throughout the walls of that entire House of Culture, you have a portrait or printing of Alwyn Bully. You have something of Mabel Cordero, Sissy Cordero. You have something of Exile One with Gordon Henderson. You have something with Gramat. You have something with Midnight Groovers. You have all of those icons, all of those cultural icons. We have now a Golden Drum Award being given to persons who give 20 years of cultural service. Why not adorn that whole building? So when a young person walks into the House of Culture, they'll see a portrait of Alwyn Bully and a little inscription telling you who this man was. You'll see a portrait of Mabel Cordero telling you who this person was. You'll see something with Chubby and the Midnight Groovers. You see something with Swinging Stars. You see something. And that is why I'm saying we have to go back to the young people. Because if we just talk about it, you and I know what obtained. We want that legacy. Another example. I mean, the St. Mary's Academy, as I indicated, started off in 1932. About 30 plus years ago, it was recognized that the student population has to be increased. And through the vision and leadership of Brother Egbert Germain, that building, that wing, this wing facing the street was built with persons contributing like old boys like Wally Astafan, may his soul rest in peace, and several other, Dr. McIntyre, a whole bunch of them contributed to that. The building is now called the Brother Egbert Germain Wing. Brother Germain just celebrated a couple of days ago? He just turned 89 on the 9th of September. And this is someone that we should be celebrating, someone who have contributed immensely to education and church life. Okay? Just last Friday, as a matter of fact, we renamed, or not rather renamed, we named the science lab at SMA as the Elwin Jolly Science Lab. Cuthbert Elwin, an educator and principal, former principal, may his soul rest in peace, of St. Mary's Academy. In sports, in education, he was involved in the school. And Pelham Jolly, which I'm sure you know, Pelham Jolly, and his brother Andy Jolly. Andy did not go to St. Mary's, but Pelham went. So we have renamed the lab at the St. Mary's Academy as the Elwin Jolly's Science Lab. And Jollies have undertaken to support the lab throughout, financially and otherwise. These are the kind of things we have to do. So young people now coming up will see those things and will be able to learn, to show some gratitude as well, and understand their history. So, like I said earlier, we need to have school programs and projects. We need to engage and have that conversation with the 4-H clubs in the various high schools. The whole question of national hero and what is and what do they see or what do they constitute to be a national hero. We need to have heritage education. So we need to go into schools and talk about the Kalinago people and have the chief go in there and talk about the Kalinago people and our history as the Maroons and that type of thing, and have the literature in the school as well to support these programs. We need to have youth engagement days. How do we engage the youth? Have youth engagement day where the youth are engaged in the conversation like we're having tonight. And like I said, the digital media and the apps are available now. They're more advanced than you and I. I have to be going to my grandson all the time if I'm struggling and say, hey, Tasha, help Papa there. I'm having a little struggle with this thing. That's where they are. Mentorship program. That is so critical. When you and I grew up, there were certain persons that we look up to that were our mentor. Persons that provide the necessary guidance and direction. Annual commemorations and community service. How do we get our young people again back involved in community service? There is an ongoing conversation now on Matt's show talking about the young people and how they have become, especially our young men. And bear in mind, the St. Mary's Academy, up until now, is the only all boys, I repeat, all boys school on the island, the St. Mary's Academy. All the other schools are co-ed, boys and girls. The St. Mary's Academy is the only all-boys school on the island. And you're talking about a school population of well over 300 young men. How do we get into supporting the school? And I'm making that plea and that call to all those SMA old boys who may be listening to this program tonight. How do we, as alumni of the St. Mary's Academy, come back and provide that mentorship that is required for these 300 plus young men, that to give them engage in community service, in annual? How do we do that? Because these are 300 plus young minds that is going through an institution that is going to be someday out there as leaders in community, as policemen, as doctors, as firemen, as politicians. How do we give them that foundation that is required to enable them now to take on that leadership role and to recognize what we are discussing here tonight, the whole question of our national heroes and how do we recognize that? So I'm saying this and I'm placing some emphasis on the young people. But like I said on the last program, we can't just throw them out and say, oh, young people are supposed to do this and young people are supposed to do that. We who are still around as the seniors, the elders, or whatever we might want to term ourselves, have to be there to provide that guidance and that leadership and support. We can't just throw them out to the wolves and say, well, young people, you're not doing this and young people should do that. How do we close the divide and communicate with these young people so that we understand their language, they understand us, and we can communicate and achieve the results and the goals that we are setting ourselves for?
Right. Now, Dr. Andre, I want to put this in your court. Where do these young people go to get inspired, to see these role models that we speak about? Where do they go now? There is no place for them to go to find these role models. Like you mentioned earlier in your introductory remarks, people who displayed national pride and unity, visionary, brave, serve as examples, who made self-sacrifice for the greater good, who were truthful and honest, told it like it was, who displayed magnanimity and humility. Where do these people go, these young people, where do they go to find the history of these people and see them and say, I want to be like him, or I want to be like her?
Well, therein lies the problem, Mr. G. Where do they go? They go on the red bench? Is that it? They go on the red bench? They get a little handout to buy a kubuli or whatever it is that they buy these days? Or they try to be like Alvin and buy a Hennessy? That is now the apex of success, of status. You're drinking Hennessy. You know, gone are the days when, look at the library. Some of us, like my friend Gabriel Christian, it was our shrine. We venerated the library. When I was at sixth form, I would probably make the occasional pilgrimage to the convent high school under the watchful eye of the nuns. Make sure I was doing what I'm supposed to do. And I'm happy I did. And I made the sign of the cross when I left. Tell the nuns I could be trusted with your literature. Well, I don't think it was the literature they were worried about. Well, that's okay. What about those other educators? What about people like Dorothy Levy, former principal of the convent high school, worked at the sixth form college? They didn't pay her for that extra work. What about people like the late Kay Polidor? And what about a string of educators? People would talk about a Miss Shillingford who was at the Roseau Boys School. I never really met her, but she's legendary. What about people like Eric Watty, who in the late 40s and 50s nurtured a whole generation of young Dominican lads, and they all talk about him in sports and as a brilliant educator. What about this fellow, Will Strathmore Stevens in the North? Made fame as an educator, not just when he occupied the position of Minister of Education in the 60s, but before that. What about these folk? Haven't been considered along the historical continuum, along the path or trajectory of growth of Dominica.
Let me just say, let's take a call.
Caller on the line, go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Andre, the name of the Dominican group, I was in Manhattan, New York, was the Dominica Benevolent Society, and they were located at 44 126th Street in Harlem, and they did
very true
to Dominica.
That's right. I've written about them, so I endorse your message. Absolutely true.
Thank you.
They have to be considered.
Yes, definitely.
You know, so I agree with you totally. You know, so this could be a tremendous undertaking to our generation, those of us who still have a little voice to be heard, a little strength, those of us who've been liberated from arthritis, those of us who have not had to deal with the debilitating effects of dementia or some of those terrible diseases and so on. An enterprise to rediscover and to reintroduce our history to our folk, whether in Dominica or abroad. Make everyone feel that this is an inclusive mission. No one will be ignored. There will be no discrimination on the basis of politics, class, caste, or location. And if we undertake that kind of enterprise, just think of the impact, Mr. G, on Dominica's development. People abroad will feel a little more welcome. There are people in Dominica abroad who will not invest. Why? because they are seeing what happens to those who invest who don't support the political directorate. Death by 1,000 stabs in the back. Not from the colonizers. That is the saddest part of our history as we speak today. The self-hatred, the greed that is robbing us of our heritage. And that should be reversed. Thank you.
Well, yes, that certainly should be reversed. And Alvin, your take on that, because, you know.
No, I totally agree, and I subscribe to what Dr. Andres just said. Let me just say, Mr. G, and again, forgive me if I sometimes go back to SMA, my alma mater, but 53 years ago to this date, you had a report published of the Committee of Inquiry into the Disturbances at St. Mary's Academy. The report is dated the 7th of June, 1972. That changed the trajectory of education as we know it, not just at SMA, as I said, but throughout education and high schools in Dominica. And that committee was chaired by Mr. C.A. Menard, Charles Menard, who is now deceased. He was the chairman. You had also other members, Parry Bellot, who is deceased. You had Gordon Morrow, who is deceased. You had E.B. Henry, who is deceased. You had the secretary, Peter J.F. Israel, who is deceased. The only member who is living now is Dorothy Levy. She was a member of that committee. Dorothy Levy. She's the only living member now, 53 years ago, who served as a member of that committee. And I think the point that Irvin is saying, how do we not tap into this person and recognize what role she played 53 years ago? She was part of a committee that made recommendation in terms of what should and should not take place at St. Mary's Academy and education in general. How many of our high school students, not just at SMA, that knows about that? And Mrs. Levy is still alive. She's still alive and very alert too. Not just alive, she's very alert. So I am saying this to say that we have to tap into the resource that we have. Those of us, as Irvin says, who are not anywhere close to dementia yet, who can still move, who are physically strong, who has that mental capacity. And that is why a government must be a government of all the people, as our constitution itself says. Why should you not take an idea from Irvin Andre or whoever it is, simply because they are adverse to your policies? It's nothing personal. I don't take anything personal against anyone. I may disagree with your policy. I will say, as far as I'm concerned, that policy is not right. And what about this idea? Let all the ideas contend. And that is the only way I believe we can move as a nation. As we move, as I said, into our 50th anniversary as an independent nation and heading into the next 50, where would we like to see Dominica and its people? And where would we like to see our national heroes? Who constitutes our national heroes? And what does that mean to us as a people? And how does that help us as we develop, as we're out there in the wild world? How does that help us as a people? I mean, we were all elated, and rightly so, when Thea Laffour did what she did at the Olympics. I mean, it was a joy for us. There were folks who literally cried when they saw it, when she's on that big stage and our national anthem is being played. That was about a year ago. I mean, maybe some of the young folks still remember the name Thea Laffour, but giving the awards and doing all this recognition, I mean,
where is the stadium?
You know how do we ensure that legacy? That's that word. How do we ensure that legacy continues? So 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, you ask any high school student or someone who is involved in sport, do you know Thea Laffour? Do you hear of that? Do you know of that person? What is it do we have to show? So I think we have some work ahead of us. And I think we should not be daunted by the challenges, Mr. G. I know sometimes we feel like giving up and saying, you know what, I'm done with this. I've had enough. But I think as we live, as we continue, we have to keep pressing. And I think we can make a change. We can influence change. We can, in our little part, we can play whatever part we can, we can play in our own little way. And hopefully, as I said, as we move into that next phase of our independence as a country, we can see things, being a little different from what it is. And again, I would say, I hope we got 3 years to decide to change the name of that hospital. And it's not for lack of room of recommendation. This hospital should not be called the Dominica-China Friendship Hospital. It should be more appropriately named by one of our esteemed medical persons. As I said, I threw out, for example, Carissa Etienne. It should be called the Dr. Carissa Etienne Hospital or Medical Center, whatever we want to call it, or the Dr. Don McIntyre, or several of the other great doctors that have served Dominica and served us very well, and who are considered our national hero. I don't see the significance, no matter what one might argue that we may have received in terms of assistance from China, that does not in any shape or form justify us having our one and only hospital on the island called the Dominica-China Friendship Hospital. I think the government must take some steps immediately and change that as we celebrate our 50th year of independence just 3 years from now.
Right. Now, Dr. Andre, I spoke to Dr. Carissa Etienne just days before she passed. She was upbeat. She was looking forward to coming down to the region and set up a practice here. And she had all the plans laid out. And then she passed. You see, this is the same thing that you're talking about, those of us who are not yet suffering from dementia and so on. Same thing Alvin is talking about. You need to make use of these people while they're still around. Now, you asked, in terms of Thea Fawn, look at where she has put Dominica. Look at the standard she has set. You asked, where is the stadium? So where is the stadium, Dr. Andre?
That is precisely the point. Where is the stadium? Or what have we prioritized over the stadium? That's another way of asking that very same question. And that is a measure or an indictment of our lack of interest in preserving the historical footprints of our country. And that should be changed. We're talking about persons. Two persons have just come to mind. We haven't mentioned Rosie Douglas. Rosie Douglas's contribution is not on the basis of the 9 months he occupied the seat of Prime Minister. His contribution goes much deeper, going back to 1969, the contributions he made in the 70s in Toronto, his leadership in the Mathaba movement,
in Montreal
to liberation organizations all over, quite frankly. He, when you mentioned, they've just did a documentary shown at the Toronto International Film Festival based on the Sir George Williams University incident, featuring Rosie as the leader who paid the brunt for his. A few weeks ago or a couple of months ago, I went to an estate sale, as I typically do, Mr. G, and I saw a stack of newspapers for sale. The Toronto Star, one was 1971. And on one of the pages, it listed all the Canadian universities which were impacted in a positive fashion by the sacrifices of people like Rosie and others and so on. These are unheralded heroes, you see, unheralded heroes. And he, unfortunately, we paid the price because we lost what his leadership would have meant. Let me suggest two other spheres of activity that should be considered in terms of persons to be selected for that exalted status. I'm going to make mention of one person, Twistleton Centara Bertrand. I might be biased because I know him well. He's from Portsmouth, and my father-in-law. He's deceased. His contributions, his training to become a soldier in World War II, his contributions in Dominica in terms of the Dominica Defense Force. He left just before whatever happened from 1976, so to speak. He served as aide-de-camp to 4 lieutenant governors in Toronto. He was a captain in the Canadian Armed Forces. He himself was a walking ambassador from Dominica. He was able to influence a lieutenant governor from Toronto, Lincoln Alexander, to visit Dominica, where he was feted and dined by Mary Eugenia Charles when she was prime minister. Individually, he never received any type of appointment as an ambassador or God knows whatever it is that they call themselves these days. But he, quite frankly, was a walking poster for Dominica. And he didn't need much encouragement to speak about Dominica. And he did it for free. You see? So this is what I'm saying. We have to be very inclusive in any initiative. And let me ask you this. Knowing what is happening in Dominica today, would we agree that the task, the monumental task of starting the process of identifying persons who would be regarded as heroes of this small isle is much too broad and important to be left in the hands of political directorates and their lackeys and their sycophants and their apostles? In my respectful view, it is. And perhaps this is an initiative that Dominicans abroad, the diaspora once again, may be called upon not to come down cynically and steal an election and impose hardship on the backs of Dominicans on the ground, but to engage in a noble enterprise, to put their efforts and, quite frankly, whatever contribution they can make in starting that initiative. There has been no better time that could be done. We have internet, we have Instagram, we have MoneyGram, we have Gramophone, we have Twitter, we have X, we have Y. It has never been AI. Well, I'm IA, but that's okay. We have every avenue of reaching out to make such an initiative a worthy enterprise, a lasting legacy that transpires political partisanship. And the question is, do we have the resources to undertake that monumental task on behalf of Dominica? The answer, my friends, is blowing in the wind. Thank you very much.
Very true. Alvin, Q95 took the initiative to start this kudos to our heroes. And after our discussion here tonight, I'm inspired to continue it.
Oh, yeah.
Because I can see there is a gap, there is a void there. And I think the powers that be would be well advised to take some of the initiative that we suggest here tonight to build a museum. What is the Arwa Gods of Culture? But that is taking so long to complete. You don't know when it's going to complete. But I know Warwick Strike started doing something and then it was vandalized and it had to be moved or something. The fact of the matter is Dominica needs to have something somewhere where young people can go and look at role models and pattern their life, take example on them, and to see how they can follow these people's footsteps to make something of themselves. Alvin, we're coming to the end of the discussion. So your closing remarks?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mr. G. I totally, and I want to lend my support and congratulations to you and Q95 for that initiative that you've taken now, and recognizing folks who have made significant contribution towards the development of Dominica. And the People's Award, or whatever you call it, the recognizing those persons. I think that's an excellent initiative. But let me just close, and I'll say very briefly, as I started off at the start of the conversation, what's the significance of those national heroes, or those persons we recognize in our national life? And I think recognizing excellence and sacrifice, that word sacrifice is important, we don't see it much often now in political life or in business life. People are not prepared to take sacrifice. I mean, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but when you talk about someone like maybe Brother Egbert Germain, the sacrifice that he undertaken when he took over the head of the school. So sacrifice, they help the country formally acknowledge people who have contributed significantly in often difficult and unsung roles. Last program we had former Prime Minister O.J. Serafin. O.J. Serafin took on the role when a country was in crisis. a country almost deteriorated in crisis. We had a constitutional crisis. And he stepped forward as a young man then, took on that role. And thereafter, we had a Hurricane David. So
Alvin, as you say that, I must tell you, I didn't say so on the last program that we had when OJ was with us. But in fact, I personally, I made that recommendation to the Committee for National Salvation to look at Oliver Seraphin with the interim prime minister. I personally went to pick him up, brought him to my home, my back porch, and that is where the deal was made for him to act as prime minister of the country.
Right. And I mean, he stepped up when we had a difficult time during our history. Okay. Then, of course, we talk about the role modeling. These awards set example for the younger generation. Let me underscore that, the younger generation, about what kind of service is valued. Leadership, perseverance, commitment, community, culture. I mean, this is what it's all about. It's not just giving the award and 12 months from now, we can't even remember who got the award. Promoting national identity and unity by publicly honoring people from across sectors meaning across political sectors, across business sectors, public service, culture, agriculture. These are what helped affirm that all parts of the society matters. And again, that is in keeping with our constitution. I refer to the preamble. Incentive for civic responsibility. We no longer teach civics in the school. Unfortunately, you and I benefited from that as well as Irvin. We no longer have that. But it's an incentive for civic responsibility. Knowing that such recognition is possible can motivate more citizens to serve selfishly, civic engagement. And that's one of the areas we're trying to get our young people more involved in. And historical memory. Many recipients are individuals whose work otherwise may be forgotten. These awards help preserve their legacy. Again, I reference that. How many persons know that OJ Seraphin was one of our prime ministers during the most turbulent time of our history as a country, just a few months after having gained independence? So it is intended for historical memory. And I will just say finally that a national hero is a citizen who embodies the nation's deepest value and has made lasting contribution. Recognition should combine formal honors, education, cultural integration, and that young people should engage through interactive, creative, and value-based method so that the heroes live on not just as history, but as role models. That's what we want it to be. Not just as history, but also as role models. So these young people can look up and say, these were the doctors we had, these were the politicians we had, these were the business, these were the trade unionists. I would like to know more about this individual. I would like to be like that when I grow up. You know, as a young kid, you go and you ask a young kid when we were young, what would you like to be? And some of them say, I want to be a policeman. Why do you want to be a policeman? Because I like to see the policemen. They're orderly people. Or I want to be a doctor because I want to go help people. So this is where I think the young people can get involved. And I would say again, notwithstanding the challenges that we may confront, I think we can still look optimistically towards the road ahead. And thank again, Mr. G, for having me a part of that conversation. Thanks to my fellow panelists, Dr. Irvin Andre. He and I go way, way back. I don't want to start to put any numbers on that because you start to calculate some years there. And my good friend Lambi, who's also doing a fantastic job. And to the many callers, I think we got quite a few calls coming in. You can see that people are very passionate about this conversation and to show in at the console and to say let's keep the conversation alive. Let's build on it and let's. I agree with the point that Irvin made. Maybe it's an initiative that somehow those of us in the diaspora might have to give a little more impetus to and see how we could work with the folks on island and seek to make that happen. And there's tremendous opportunities and areas in which we can contribute towards the overall development of our country.
Thanks, Alvin. Now, Irving, in your closing remarks, you have the final word as usual. I mean, what would you like to leave with us tonight in terms of preserving the legacy of these national heroes and role models so that a lot of up-and-coming young people emulate them, know their history, know their contribution, and emulate them.
Let me, before I go on, let me thank Lambi, Sherwin, yourself, Alvin, for your fantastic contribution this evening. But let me just say a few things with respect to what we're talking about this evening. And I will end with making reference to three persons who we haven't identified, but they should. Let me say that education is not the same as scholastic achievement. You can be educated by attending high school, but you become self-educated. One of the persons that comes to mind is this fellow who's typically is criticized on radio is a fellow from St. Joseph called Blessings. Here's a man who's, I don't know his personal history, but he's said enough that he's educated himself to a point where he can speak intelligently on radio about the issues that affect, or should I say, afflict Dominica. That's one point. Take another guy as Leopold Monigod Emmanuel, so-called outside child. And we know Dominica's peculiar history and how many quote-unquote outside children have fared. Here's a man who overcome all these obstacles, founded or started an iconic brand in terms of agro-processing called Dumfruit. Even when the company failed in '68, he resuscitated his ambitions like a phoenix, purchased land, developed land, sold land, and became, in my view, one of the finest examples of a person who started from scratch and made something of himself. Let me give another point, make another point with respect to heroes. They're not perfect human beings. They have their own flaws. Take a man like Winston Churchill, acknowledged in England as the epitome of all that is wonderful. And yet he caused starvation in India during World War II of over 1 million people. The British historians don't talk about this, but the Indian historians do. What about Glenn Emanuel? What about Glenn Emanuel? He had the audacity to sue a lawyer in Dominica. That is something these folks don't do at all, because they're afraid of the wrath of the profession, even more than the wrath of God. Some lawyers told him, don't do this. This is another lawyer. You can't sue. You can't seek to charge. And he was pillarized, pulverized, vilified, victimized. His house was burnt, and some of these folk had the audacity to say, or to sing, he did it himself. He never wavered. Not until death. Former soldier too. Trained in Trinidad. Never went. Well, did he even go to secondary school in Dominica? No. But he educated himself in England. He became a lawyer. Worked as a magistrate, I believe, in Grenada. Came to Dominica, chief magistrate. Went into private practice. Did well for himself. And he stood as a bastion. Unreal, strong, unwavering. Didn't switch sides, you know. He didn't cross the floor, you know. He didn't cross the floor after God spoke to him. He wasn't governed by the God of mammon, of money. Profiles in courage. And look at us today. The radio stations. Q95, not Q. DBS. Aba on Mango or Aba Popo, whatever it is. Kyrie. Vibes. They preach the same gospel. They sing from the same hymn book. They are governed by the same considerations, not to alienate the folks in power. And yet one has defied the odds. So bagay you can key Q95. In my view, the only reason they haven't shut it down because of the backlash. And the owner, I'm not sure his name, has stood steadfast, unrelenting, unwavering, committed to the cause of democracy. And he should be considered, whatever his name is, on the list of Dominica's national heroes. I thank you. Nothing else to say, Gasso.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Dr. Andre. And I'm really glad and hopeful, in fact, that from our discussion here tonight, we have left the indelible impression on the minds of the people of Dominica, I believe, that there is something more needed. You know, there is something needed to preserve the legacy of our heroes and our role models. We have many heroes and role models. As I said, there are many people in communities in Dominica, ordinary people who over the years have done extraordinary things, who have influenced and changed people's lives for the better, whether they're nurses or carpenters or masons, whatever it is, or farmers, but they've made an indelible mark on the lives of the people and the communities. Those people's, their legacy should be preserved. And we need a place where we can put these people's legacy so young people can go there and read about them and see them and know who they are, what they stood for, so they could emulate them and follow in their footsteps. So I thank you. I thank you, Irvin. I thank you, Alvin. I thank you, Lambie and Sherwin. I thank all the people on Facebook and on YouTube who stayed with us throughout this thing tonight. And let me just say, it's only left for me to say good night, everybody. And have a great night.
All right, Mr. G. Good night. Good night.
All
Thanks.
Right.
All right.
Care, bye.
Yeah. Okay, Lambie. All right. Thanks.
The Global View on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from, understanding our past, embracing our present, charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty, embracing justice, peace, and togetherness. The Global View on Q.